Hey everyone, this is Chef. How's it going? This video is a little different than stuff that we normally put on the channel, so I wanted to give it a little bit of a preamble. I usually use this channel, the eponymous main channel, Chef Plays Games, for edited content, condensed content, focused content that's, here's how you do something or here's a change that's coming up. This video is not that. It's a VOD of a stream that I did earlier this week where I had the opportunity to talk to Cecil and Roy, two ArenaNet devs, about the progress and philosophy behind some recent world versus world changes. Things like restructuring, defense changes, scoring changes, that kind of stuff. In a world where I had more time, I would edit this video down a bit, I would pull some clips out, but unfortunately I'm about to go on a trip for the next 2 weeks, and I just don't have the time to get it out before I leave. So I thought I'd just put it up unedited. It's a little longer than stuff we normally do on the channel, but it was a really interesting conversation, and it's neat that ArenaNet is willing to reach out to different kinds of creators, do these interviews, and talk about some stuff that, may not actually have been mentioned in any blogs or streams or anything like that. So this is not a video about balance patch, this is not balance changes, anything like that. This is structural changes and structural things that exist in world versus world. So I hope you enjoy. It was a good time. I appreciated doing it. I hope I have the opportunity to do some more in the future, and I think it led to some really good conversations. I'll see you guys then. Hope you enjoy. All right, and then here's our other visitor.
Hello.
How you doing?
Doing good. Thanks for having me.
All right. Do you know, this is it might sound a little bit weird as a starter question. Do you know how to type?
I have typed before, yes.
Do you know how to write?
I know how to write?
Yeah, like pen and paper.
Question. Oh, yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Yeah, not like have you written a book? Like, can you produce letters with your hand?
Usually.
Okay, cool. I was just wondering. So, I mean, technically we still have a minute, but I don't know if you just want to get it started like a minute early and then, we can be done a minute early.
It's your show, man. I'll follow
true.
your lead.
Sure. Yeah, so thanks for taking the time and stopping by. I appreciate it. I did. I have like a couple of questions that I've got prepped for you, but I'm a small talk guy. I'm a noted yapper, according to many people. So really, the thing I wanted to start with before we even get into talking about restructuring is congratulating you, Cecil, specifically as a OCX GVG draft tournament runner-up. Probably at this point, I would say the second most successful ArenaNet GVG player. I think that's a pretty fair assessment.
I don't know about that.
Third? First? Are you claiming that you might be better than Roy?
I'm actually better than Roy. That's what it is.
Not saying very much.
Have you GVG'd recently, Roy, or are you retired from the scene?
For me to have GVG'd recently, there would have had to have been GVGs going on. So.
Yeah, so maybe, Cecil, at this point, you are the best GVGer who works at ArenaNet.
Wow. Yeah, I can't stay up until 3 a.m.
Yeah, that's actually my superpower, is just staying up till 3 a.m. to be a part of that tournament.
I mean, like, you told me that you participated, and I was like, oh, that's pretty neat. And then you were like, yeah, I was waking up at like 3 a.m. to do footage reviews, and I was like, that could not be me. I would not do that. That's a level of dedication that's completely different.
Pancake
really
has corrected me in chat. There are 2 guilds on an GVGing. I'm not good enough to GVG with them, so
that's fair.
Cecil is better.
I'll see if I can join one.
And then you were also commanding a bit recently, weren't you?
Sure. Yeah, technically commanding. I am a proud member of Demolish Post, and we have been getting demolished a lot. So I've been commanding random days, trying to just honestly keep our corner of EBG happy.
How's that been going for you?
It's alright. I feel the urge to play support classes as a commander, and being both support and commander and having an ArenaNet tag on makes me a huge target and frequently wrecks my group, but it's been fun.
Yeah, I feel like if I was going to command on a support build, you need to play like a permanent bunker profession. to be on like a firebrand with 3 invulns or whatever.
Yeah, my most successful day was actually just on support Scourge, but it's probably just because I'm most familiar with Necro.
Can I ask about 1 up, 1 down? Yes.
But
So
overall fun.
yeah, it's a good time. I mean, I've said this on stream a couple times, but a common forum take is that nobody in ArenaNet actually like plays the game, and it's been nice to see you doing like some GVG stuff, some open tag and stuff, getting out there, experiencing some of the game mode. It's good to see.
Yeah, I think it's good to remember that we have the ability to turn our tags off, and we actually have a fair amount of ArenaNet players that just play the game all the time, incognito, and just want to be a normal player.
It's mostly to avoid like the permanent ArenaNet tag snipe that like Roy is currently experiencing live on camera.
It's more fun though. I'm gonna be honest. Like I enjoy the tag snipe.
There are times when it's fun, but I can definitely understand that there's times when you just like don't want people to know that it's you.
Yeah, absolutely.
And then also like a congratulations to both you and to the World versus World dev team overall. You guys have had a fairly busy summer with the release schedule that you've had going on. Restructuring is live, scoring changes are live way earlier than I thought they would be. You guys have been you've been working on some stuff. Varying degrees of popularity on those changes, I would say, but definitely a good time to be working on learning new stuff.
Yeah, for sure. Congrats, Roy, on the scoring changes. That's big win for him.
Yep.
Team effort, as is everything.
Yeah, that's true. We have a really awesome World v World team. You don't hear from our engineers very often, but we have some amazing platform engineers that work on our team and make some really cool stuff happen for us.
Yeah, the release schedule has been nice lately. I mean, my perspective on it is so weird because I started playing in like I think late 2018. I started playing when basically when Dragonfall came out. So like end of POF, which I've heard from people who've played longer than me was like one of the worst times to play World versus World because you were stuck in that support meta where the only 2 professions you could legally play were like Scrapper and Firebrand. So for me, across like my entire World versus World journey, it's only kind of ever improved. I got to avoid a lot of the dark times, like the post-seasons triple red BL era. I wasn't around for that. I only had to suffer through like the Stealth Blast meta a little bit before that got changed. So I think I definitely have like, a rosier perspective than a lot of other people, but it's been good lately. The quality of life changes, the improvements that have rolled out have been pretty steady. But the thing that we wanted to talk about specifically for this was the restructuring system, which came out almost a month ago at this point, a little bit more than a month ago at this point. And kind of to open that discussion up, I'm curious to hear both of you guys talk about what kind of motivated the restructuring system. So if you go back all the way to the original Alliances post from like 2018, the stated goals for that were things like make matchups more fair, fix server imbalances, things like that. And, at least for me talking to a lot of other veteran players, I think a lot of that motivation flowed out of some of the limitations and issues that ArenaNet identified with Seasons specifically as a major source of player burnout. But at least from your perspective, what are the kind of like the issues that restructuring purports to fix with the way that World versus World exists structurally?
Yeah, I mean, I could start. World Restructuring, from my perspective, is primarily a matchup balance tool. It is trying to present a system that allows players to have a reasonable amount of control over their placement, but to really put more competitive matchups on the table. And so some of the specific ways that we want to, specific things we think about in matchup balance are player population across different time zones. It's not that we believe World Restructuring necessarily improves the number of players in any given time zone, but we're trying to spread them more logically so that those players have fights when they want them and have opposition in their game, rather than having, issues with stacked servers where certain servers might only have an OCX or C population, and feel to their NA players to be completely empty. And I think, though it is a balanced tool, a lot of world restructuring is about improving the feeling of logging into World v World and going up against another team, and there actually being people on your side and on their side to feel like you have a chance.
And did you find that a lot of that stacking kind of, because like I know how it would work in seasons and post seasons. You'd basically like pick a flavor of the month server that people wanted to join, and then you just stack the hell out of it in NA. You'd move like alliances there or something like that, and it led to these really imbalanced styles and approaches of kind of like structuring the content in World versus World. So it's mostly just a tool to kind of equalize some of those things out, get rid of those spikes and valleys of where player content lines up.
I would say that's its primary purpose, and it has some secondary benefits of allowing us to be a little more reactive to population fluctuation, which is something that you may remember from those original posts. You know, as the population of just active World v World players changes or player behavior changes,
I can do that, Azure.
Having a system, you know, that's algorithmically driven that we can make edits to, rather than the static server system, allows us to respond to those changes better. You know, if you think to even like other games, when you lose player population, you do things like server merges that can be fairly wild from an engineering standpoint. And this is, you know, though it is a long coming engineering project, it is more flexible now that it's up.
And I mean, there was a time, this is actually something I didn't even know until I started doing these server history project things, but there was actually a time when link servers weren't a thing. There's actually, every server was just, you know, that was your server. And my understanding of it from talking to players is that eventually some of the population imbalances on those servers got so wide, where you had servers like Iridon Terrace that had very few people on them versus servers like Blackgate that were absolutely massive, that the linking system was kind of like the first opportunity to try and address that, to equalize some of the populations out.
Yeah, I think Roy could probably speak to that better. I wasn't a very active World v World player pre-limited servers, so I don't know what the experience was like there as much.
Roy, do you have that kind of historical perspective in the days of like when there was a T8 in NA?
I actually didn't play on NA as much in the early days. I started out playing on EU, but I mean, you know, the server structure was the same on both regions. So
was there a tier 10 in EU because it has more servers?
I think there was tier 9.
Oh
I think
God.
it was one additional. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, so kind of going back a little bit to your original question, which was, you know, about to sort of wrap the two questions together, I guess. What do you see the world restructuring system for, and then this talking about like servers versus world restructuring. I don't know that there's necessarily one perfect system, right? I don't know that world restructuring is claiming to be the perfect system. I don't know that servers were claiming to be the perfect system. I think every system kind of has pros and cons to it. But there were definitely some serious issues with the server system prior to Lynx, and I also think there were some pretty big issues with Lynx as well. The server system with Lynx after it. I mean, you know, like you said yourself, obviously there were massive population disparities between the bottom of bronze tier and the top of gold tier. And as someone who primarily played like top of silver, low bottom on Pike and Square on EU, you know, there were like definitely very noticeable differences between those types of servers, the servers that were at the top and the servers that were at the bottom. And I imagine it was probably pretty similar for North America as well. And then, yeah, when Linkings came out, I obviously, I don't know this for sure, just because obviously I wasn't working at ArenaNet at the time, and I didn't have the opportunity to really speak to developers as a player back then. But I imagine that server linkings were never really meant to be instituted for as long as they were. You know, we all know when alliances, as they were called, or world restructuring was first announced. And I don't know that anyone necessarily planned for, you know, the server linkings to be the system that was used for as long as it was. I kind of always looked at it as a little bit more of a short-term sort of solution to the problem that we just talked about, which was that some servers just were massively imbalanced. And so this was a way to kind of get more of a condensed population, hopefully, equalize populations across the board a little bit more. But of course, you still had the same major drawback that the servers system always had, which was that players could transfer between servers. So, every time there was a relink, you would say, oh, where does my guild want to go this relink?
Yeah, what's the flavor of the month server to be on this
thing?
thing?
Exactly. And obviously that stayed for a while. And so I think, one big advantage with World Restructuring is, as Cecil was saying, it's aimed to be a way to better populate, better balance out those worlds or teams, whatever you want to call them, not just based on population, but also based on time zones. So we're hoping to be able to, as you were saying, give the time zones like off hours, OCX and whatnot, better populated matchups across the board, than servers necessarily provided. I also always kind of looked at it as a little bit of a way to, we're giving some control to the player over who they want to play with a limit, which is obviously very important, because obviously if you could just play with 10,000 different people or choose to play with the same 10,000 people, that would cause some similar issues as we've seen before with servers. But you can choose now up to a limit of who you want to play with, which I think is nice. I think when that was first presented, that seemed pretty promising. That was pretty exciting. I remember going on a tea time, actually, I think, when the first Alliance post got made on the forums and talking about it. It was exciting to think that we were going to kind of have more control over, the people that we were able to play with and group up, as opposed to kind of getting, relinked around. That was kind of an exciting idea. Yeah. I don't know if that answered all of your questions about the servers. If you have more.
It did. The one thing that I wanted to add is it kind of seems like a balanced nightmare to start thinking about adding things like rewards and having winning matter when you have these low pop servers that are stuck in T8 that have like no reasonable shot of ever climbing out of that tier and are just relying on guilds to transfer to them to do anything.
Yeah, I mean, I will say I'm obviously not qualified to speak for the entire World vs. World population. I don't know that anyone is. I do think that there were people who enjoyed that sort of disparity in a way. I think there was a level of kind of understanding that if you were in Gold League, you had larger map groups that ran around. You focused a lot more on PPTing. Definitely during the seasons, those were the groups that were kind of slated to win those seasons.
Oh, no.
Or those tiers.
This is what happened.
And then I think a lot of people kind of looked, and again, this is obviously from an EU perspective versus like I don't know exactly how NA thought about it. Although I know like NA had certain fight tiers or something. I think during the old server system. But then you had Silver League, which was kind of like a mix between Bronze and Gold, and then you had Bronze League, which a lot of people kind of looked at, smaller scale Havoc groups. And obviously that's generalizing. That's obviously never going to be
seasons,
the case across the board. But I think there were some people that kind of enjoyed that difference of system. But again, I think in regards to trying to create sort of more fair and balanced matchups across the board, it like I said, it obviously has its drawbacks. And so yeah, you're totally right. If we want to give every person and every team or world an equal chance of, or relatively equal chance of winning, and at least feel like they have an equal chance of winning, and we want to move towards making winning matter, move towards making scoring more fair, then definitely there needs to be a better system in place to support that, and that's why you see I would say everything that we're doing and have been doing is kind of steps towards an ultimate goal, along the way, and so there's multiple steps to that process.
Yeah, definitely. There's two things that Chad is saying that I want to mention really quick because I think they kind of fold in. Is that during like the Seasons era and even shortly after the Seasons era, you definitely had different like tiers of population in World versus World, where the atmosphere and the personality that like the big NA T1 fight servers had, places like JQ, BG, Maguma, etc., had a really different like community vibe than servers that were down in like T7, T8, where the servers that were further down kind of had these smaller, more tightly knit communities. They were, obviously smaller because the population size is smaller, but they were also just like more focused on the community because there wasn't this external pressure to win. And so it was interesting to see that evolve, but also, there might be times that that's not necessarily desirable, where you want the player base's expectations around the game to fracture that much.
Yeah.
And then the other thing that people are saying, which is like, it's not really related to the conversation we're having, but it was like an interesting time to note, is back before the PvE mega servers, when you would actually have like, you know, you were on Blackgate and you'd go into World versus World, and it's awful in this Lord's Room right now, by the way.
Yep.
But you'd be on BG, you'd see other people on BG in Lion's Arch, and you'd rally the forces in LA map chat.
Oh yeah.
There's a bunch of stuff in like old Guild Wars 2 that like a lot of people might not have been around for, that were really different from the way things work now.
Yeah, every Friday reset, we'd gather up in Lion's Arch. You know, it would be the Pike and Square Lion's Arch, or you know, during a particular, you know, precarious keep defense, you'd run into Lion's Arch and say we need to get more people into World versus World. You know, people would be like, oh, I didn't know there was a fight going on. You know, they jump in. Yeah, those were fun times.
Yeah, it was a really interesting conduit into kind of, you know, getting involved in the game mode.
I think Cecil maybe was gonna say something after I finished speaking last. I don't know. It sounded like you wanted to say something, Cecil.
Oh yeah, I was just going to reiterate a point here that you said kind of early in your, you know, sentence, is that we recognize world restructuring isn't like the perfect system for every type of player, every group or community, right? Like, it has real costs, and you know, one of the feedback we're seeing a lot is a loss of a feeling of server community, and that is absolutely a thing we're considerate of, and like want to find and create systems that are better for creating communities within the world restructuring system. But that is a real cost of this system. The way servers existed with open transfers, there is no reasonable way to balance those for population. There's too much player agency in the system that allows for a lot of abuse cases, and you know, you hear terms like bandwagoning and things like that, and that's absolutely a problem that world restructuring is trying to solve for, and allow, just like I said, allow us more flexibility to manage the population rather than having to kind of respond to the population changes that happen with the transfer system.
Yeah, I think that's something that was actually exposed by Seasons really well, is that sometimes what's good for a guild or even like good for a server is not necessarily good for the health of the game mode overall. And especially like even in Seasons, sometimes you will have a guild or a server that thinks something is a good idea and really like does not turn out to be a good idea at all. Like the first thing that jumps out to me is Season 2, with JQ and TC deciding that they were tired of BG winning every single matchup in Season 1, and they're like, we're just going to double team these guys. That process of like negotiating that among the different guilds on TC fundamentally broke TC's community. Like, it was never totally repaired after that process. And I mean, like, this is, I don't expect you guys necessarily to comment on this, it's something that I have observed as a player, but sometimes the community will do things that seem good in the short term but end up being really destructive in the long term. And I think restructuring is a approach that helps to mitigate some of those things from happening. Things like, you know, server stacking.
Yeah.
So what has the kind of overall timeline of the restructuring process been? There was the post in January 2018, but like for people who don't spend a lot of time in the video game sphere, or I don't know, people who weren't born until like 2020, 2018 and 2019 were like not great years for the video game industry, and then 2019, 2020 weren't like really great years for like the going outside industry and like being in the same place at the same time. So a lot of that initial processing kind of got disrupted by industry factors and public health factors, and then got picked later, I think in like 2021, something like that, is when Grouch was saying that development resources started to get allocated. So what's been the overall timeline and process of kind of getting restructuring implemented?
Yeah, so my old head knowledge will be a little fuzzy. I've only been in ArenaNet for about 3 years. But I can give the context I know of that situation, which is that a lot of the initial passes of the design of this system did happen back in 2018. A lot of smart people developed a pretty good plan back in 2018, and it was talked about with the community. but due to other business needs, like, things got reprioritized. It happens all the time in the games industry and the tech industry at large. Just because a thing was said out loud doesn't mean you have to keep working on it. You got to make decisions that are good for the business at the time. So it was deprioritized, and as you said, Grouch pointed out, in 2021 is when sort of engineering side development in earnest started happening on the system, and much of 2021 and 2022 were spent developing the back-end system that would become World Restructuring, things that handle the algorithm, allow us to switch between the server system and World Restructuring to facilitate doing betas, for example. Those systems got developed, and obviously a lot of bug fixing and solving all of the problems of a quite old game at this point, with a lot of fairly complicated infrastructure.
Yeah, like 11 years going on 12 at this point?
I think we're
12 going on 13?
12 and 13, or
yeah, I don't know. This will be 12.
This is 12 in August. Yeah, 12 in August. Yeah, okay. So yeah, it's quite old game, quite complicated system, and it likely took longer than anybody originally expected, even once work started on it. That's just, again, as a normal part of developing any kind of complex system, is you're going to find hidden work that you did not expect when you started out the plan. So I've been on this project for about 18 months. I am the competitive producer for Guild Wars 2, and I have sort of been the World Restructuring guy for the last 18 months, in that I have been doing a lot of decision making, and I interface a lot with the community. I gather a lot of the feedback, and I bring those things to the engineering team that is working on that product, and we discuss how best to make this for World Restructuring. So, and we finally launched in an always-on state on June 14th, which was a huge day for our team, and it's going reasonably well. There's still a ton of stuff. I have a giant list of things I want to improve for this system. As every person who manages a product will tell you, not all of those things are ever going to get done, but we maintain the backlog, so we have goals and can continue working to improve it.
I appreciate that you've been transparent with a lot of that stuff, like the post about the OCX matchmaking issues in particular. Was like, hey, this isn't really working like we want it to, but here's letting you know what you can do to mitigate it while we work on a better fix. Like, it's not ideal, but it's better than the no communication from ArenaNet ever meta that some people from 2017 might be used to. Nobody talked about World versus World for years around the time when I was playing, and it's nice to have that be a little different these days.
Yeah, and I would say thanks to our leadership for that, of being supportive of more transparent communication and kind of developing in the public eye a little more. It's a scary thing to do. It's a really hard thing to do in tech, and the average person doesn't understand our job. They don't understand what setbacks we might face, or general just games industry business. And that's
even
fine.
Letting you come onto my stream and talk about stuff
Yeah, exactly. But I love the system of us being able to talk about things in this, it's a live beta environment. We're absolutely still testing the system. We believe it's in a good place enough to kind of entrust World v. World to that system now, and continue actively iterating on it every week.
So did you find that the way we went through, I think something like 7-8 betas for Restructuring, something like that? My assumption always been that in large part that was to test out different matchmaking permutations, but there was also the announcement that Grouch gave in an interview that I can dig up the link for later, about how the actual system of alliances, of letting these guilds build formal communities together, was deprioritized, basically because people just started doing it anyway before the UI even existed, by making a new guild and inviting everyone to that. Was there anything else that happened during the restructuring development pipeline that was kind of like, hey, the community is doing things in a way that we didn't necessarily expect, let's try and integrate that into how we're thinking about this system?
I'm trying to think of examples since I've been on it. I mean, a lot of it is informational. I think you get into developing these systems, and you're thinking about it from a list of requirements, right? You talk about alliances sort of being shelved the Alliance's UI. From the beginning, we had been considering that a core requirement of the system, that we would not ship without that. But when you're building the system, you don't start with the most complicated part. You start with what is the simplest, what groups already exist that could approximate that. And so when we were building the back end, you approximate with guilds, right? That's more or less what happened. And eventually you go, wow, this system actually works okay with guilds. We don't necessarily need that more complex, more resource-intensive UI to get this started. And so we were always gathering data from the betas, but they were 1 week or 2 week periods that don't accurately show us what player behavior looks like under the new system. And that's what we're seeing now. Like the fact that we put this into a longer system allows me to just gather direct live data and look at it and try to understand how players are engaging with the system. I would find it really interesting to see that 500 player alliance guilds have kind of happened, those pseudo alliances. And that's really interesting. How many of those pop up versus how many 10 player guilds are being involved in the system. And trying to see is the system working well for both of those categories. That's a long answer on the Alliance's UI specific part of this. I would also say, the Alliance's UI is never fully off the table. It's not a thing we're prioritizing right now because, like I said, we have a functional system that we can draw data from. But maybe we hit a point in development where that becomes important to us. We're always open to adjusting our plans based on what...
Not yet, but I can ask about it.
Situations we're seeing from the data. Other situations we've seen as far as like play pattern, I'll say one that has come up in the community a lot is the feeling that Alliances has created a pressure for people to participate in 50-person squads. I would say that's certainly a thing that has happened recently. We are seeing large groups more frequently, possibly due to player activity, possibly due to the way Alliances are structured. But that's one of those things is like we may have to adapt to that as a player behavior. But currently, we have to figure out what is the root of that player behavior.
Yeah, I like the way you cast it as, let's get the most interesting stuff implemented first, and there's this big backlog of stuff that we can roll out over time. You can catch yourself in these situations where you're trying to build the perfect product, but before it releases, like even with the existence of a multi-week beta to test some of the relinking stuff out, there's a bunch of things that you just don't know about any big, complex, algorithmic system until you launch it and just kind of watch it work for a little bit.
Yeah, the most interesting thing we can learn is how players are interacting with the system, right? When you design a system, you kind of, I've heard the phrase, like, you cosplay playtest, right? Like, you test it as using it in all of its intended functionalities the way you designed it. Players are really good at giving us edge cases, and that was an important thing to learn. And like you brought up the recent forum post that I made that addresses one of those, right? We are considering time zones in the way that our algorithm works. We're not considering them well enough, right? In the way, especially in a situation where you have an extremely large alliance, that data can kind of get flattened out, kind of law of averages style. And I brought that to the team as I think this is an important point to tell people. We don't have a solution for it today, but telling people that this impact may be happening to them is better from my perspective than letting people think the system is broken or ignoring them or they're just getting unlucky, right? It builds up frustration, and I'm hoping that communication will let people make more kind of informed decisions about what they're doing.
Yeah, actually on that point, I want to pull and kind of synthesize a couple questions from chat, because I think people have asked a couple things that kind of tie into that point. I think this is kind of like an NA unique problem. I don't know what the state of off hours is like on EU, but it strikes me as being really difficult to balance around off hours population in NA, because the NA population is sufficiently large that 5 tiers is necessary to kind of do things like mitigate queue bug, make the game playable because nobody actually likes sitting around waiting in queue. But OCX, I don't think really has the population to support 5 tiers, and might not even have the population to support 4. And they're both on the same region, so it seems like a particularly difficult problem to solve. Of what do we do about this massive NA population and this relatively smaller but still active and important OCX population, and how do we craft an environment where kind of both of them get to play and have fun and have content and see activity with where they're at?
Yeah, I mean, that's a huge challenge, and like that's a huge goal of world restructuring. And frankly, it's one that we're only going to ever accomplish in a partial, right? To talk about an ideal scenario, in the ideal world, exactly map caps of all 4 maps for every team are filled at all times, right? And only that many people want to play World v World at any time, because that both avoids queues and perfectly fills the maps, right? That's just not realistic. We have different populations in different regions, and even if you didn't, like, say, people often bring up the case of like, what if OCX or C had servers? Now, I'm not in control of that at all, because that is a totally different part of our organization that would answer those kind of business questions. But that would not actually solve this problem. And I think it's important to remember that I live in Seattle and I play regularly during the OCX time because I just am up that late. It doesn't matter that you put a server in that time zone. That would help people's lag maybe, but it's not going to actively solve the issue of off hours play. And you mentioned you don't know as much about EU. EU has this problem. It's just less, I would argue, less defined. It's a different. They have different off hours problems.
EU is a wider place than NA. Oh no, a new build. Roy, why would you do this?
I must have broke something else.
Roy.
No.
Oh,
I actually don't know what I don't know what this changes or this update is.
I'm out, man. I'm bailing. I don't want to get stuck in here when they turn the lights off.
Maybe forced to bail. They're different off hours issues, I think, or not issues necessarily,
this
but
guy right here.
different
things we have to try and balance patch.
Incorporate when we come up with changes to game mode, which is why you see, of course, with the victory point changes that we're rolling out on Friday.
I think I actually have to different restart
numbers for each region, because
let's go do it quick.
Yeah, I'd say like at the extreme, the gaps between the population on EU are higher, but then like the average population gap is more frequent on NA, if that makes sense. Just because NA has historically had more time zone coverage than EU does. There's a lot of different. There's people that play OCX. There's people that play C. There's people that play early NA. There's people that play late NA. There's people that play EU on NA, and then EU kind of has EU time zone, and then everything else. And so it's they're different problems to think about. And like Cecil said, there's not really there's probably not a perfect solution. It's kind of the same thing with the actual population system. Restructuring versus servers versus links versus whatever. And so it's there's a lot of iterating that we have to do. There's a lot of things that we want to try. And if something doesn't work out the way we want it to work out initially, there's always room to change and potentially try and make whatever change we do better, and work better for all the different populations.
That's kind of the nature of calling it the always on beta, right? Is that a lot of this stuff can kind of get changed and iterated on.
Yeah, absolutely. And like Cecil said, he has a long list of things he wants to do for World Restructuring. I mean, it's the same thing. I have a long list of things I want to do for World versus World, in the same sort of sense.
I do want to get into like a little bit more of these kind of, not necessarily podcasty, but like roundtable discussions. And I think one of the ones I'm planning on having once I get back from doing stuff back home is like an OCX roundtable to just kind of talk about, what are the issues that the OCX community has, how does balance work, how does time zone representation work, all that kind of stuff, and just kind of have that conversation. So I think it'll be interesting to see what comes out of that, because I know from talking to some friends that I have in OCX that, like, they're not a monolith. Some people are like, these changes are really good. Some people like these changes are terrible. I hate playing the game. And it would be nice to just kind of, have a conversation with a bunch of different representatives from OCX and be like, how are things working? What works? What doesn't? What are the issues that you guys are running into with this?
Yeah, I will say, just very quickly, without maybe answering answering your question, I do think that this is something you're going to encounter anytime you're ever creating. So I mean, like what we were saying before about tech industry in general. I think there's you're always going to have a diversity of opinions. I think gaming always has a diversity of opinions. I think World versus World has one of the largest diversity of opinions I've ever seen. I don't think I've ever really seen in any forum of World versus World discussion a universal agreement from World versus World players on almost anything. And that's obviously not an excuse, right? I'm not. That's not to say that we don't want to try and make everybody happy, but I do think that we're always going to expect that things are not always going to please everyone, and that is not obviously ideal. But that is kind just kind of what you were saying, where we see some people are happy with changes and some people aren't. And I think the way I kind of look at it is, if people are happy with the change, that's awesome. And if people are not happy with the change, I want to find out why, and I want to find out if I can, make them happy with the change, or change something about that to make them happy.
I'm hearing from Twitch chat that the World versus World build update was to fix an issue that was blocking access to Mersat token 25 in Ember Bay. So now that that's resolved, we're allowed to go cap that keep again.
Yeah.
But
I think we should all go get Mersat token.
I'm actually done with it already on both of my accounts, so unfortunately I can't join you. Those don't exist to me anymore. But yeah, I was gonna say, I don't envy the task that sits in front of either you or the balance team at all, because there's no less than half a dozen different, unique, distinct World versus World communities that all want totally different things. You've got the people who like dueling and roaming. You have people who like PPT. You have small-scale groups, large-scale groups, Zerg groups. You have the defense crew. You have the off-hours crew. And everybody wants all these different things. There's no unanimous solution that you could ever possibly come up with that works for everyone. So it's always going to be this issue of meeting some needs of every community, but nobody's ever going to be completely happy with them.
Yeah, and that... to be, something else that I was trying to get to, and I couldn't find the words to, because I'm a little slow sometimes. But I think that's always been the case, right? I don't think this is necessarily new. I don't think that the World versus World community is split.
It's a good question, Siri.
And it's only been split the last year or so. I remember when I was just a player before I became a dev. When I first started playing, all I cared about was PPTing, and anyone who was GVGing on home Borderland, I was not happy with. I told them they had to leave, because they were taking up spaces that I wanted to have for players to PPT with. And then when I started GVGing, I was like, well, hold on now. I kind of like GVGing a lot more. So it's I've gone through that exact thing myself, and I think that's always been the case with the World versus World community.
It's truly crazy how many people who I've talked to who started playing in 2014 and are now guild leaders, commanders, all these different people who are like, yeah, I got my start with scouting. I just sat in a tower for 2 hours and said when people were showing up. There's an incredible amount of people who actually just got their start doing random PPT stuff, and then they got more involved, they got more engaged, they wanted to do more organized stuff, and the rest is history. And it's cool to we're talking about these different player populations, these different player groups, and they all want different things. They're not static. It's not like you're only a dueler and the only thing you ever do is dueling. There are different ways that you can approach playing the game, but people move through them and between them all the time. It doesn't mean that they're not legitimate things to balance around. They are, but it's that the actual players who make up those communities shift around a lot. Serial did have one really interesting question that I wanted to ask as well. He said, are there any recent changes, and he said this was to Roy specifically, but I kind of want to ask it to both of you. Are there any recent changes that you've made in the last year or two where feedback has been overwhelmingly positive from everyone? My guess would be that it's impossible to hate the addition of the exotic vendor. It's impossible to hate the addition of Dugan, but I wanted to see if there's anything else that jumps out at you.
Well, so I mean, I will also say I think the feeling that I've gotten, so I've only been a dev for a little over 2 years, right? So I've only been doing this for a short amount of time. And this is my first job in the industry.
Good, yeah.
The feeling that I've gotten from since I've worked here is that you tend to see, like negative feedback tends to be a little bit more outspoken than positive feedback. So I will say I think a lot of the times absence of feedback is almost a sign of like positive feedback, or so like if there was any change that I just heard nothing about, like maybe that was a positive change in a way. But yeah, I think the exotic vendor definitely was, I think the only negative thing I saw about that was people were sad that we didn't originally have a aqua breather on there, which we added the next patch. So, there you go. I guess that was probably the most universally positive patch when we added the aqua breather. I would like to think that most of the changes we've been doing have been pretty positively received, and in the sense that I think people are happy to see the game mode getting updates and the game mode getting attention, because I think for a long time the community felt like there weren't really things happening for the game mode, and I think the other thing that's really important, the thing that's most important to me, is that the community feels like they're at least being heard, at least being listened to, which is part of the reason we're doing something like this, where we're getting on and chatting with you. And it's part of the reason why I've wanted to try and post a bit more on the forums. It's part of the reason that we wanted to do the stream where we talked about the upcoming competitive changes a couple weeks ago, because it's really important to me that even if they don't necessarily agree with every single change we make, that they feel as though there's the opportunity for change to happen. There's the opportunity for them to hear or to speak with their minds. So I think overall, with that goal in mind, we've done a good job of that. We can always do better. I'll always say that we can always do better. But I think since like from when I started here to now, I feel like we've done a good job with that. I would like to think so. Anyways, I could be wrong. Maybe I'm delusional. But
Awesomeness is saying that the colored UD titles were a good change, but I distinctly remember people hating the colored UD change.
Yeah,
like there were people who got mad about that.
Yeah.
It's really hard to please everyone, but I also like your mental of like, if you never hear somebody complain about it, then it's universally liked.
Well, okay, no, that's twisting my words a little bit. I won't assume that I'll go even further. I won't assume that any change I make is ever like universally liked, just because I'm always someone who wants to strive to do more and better. I tend to want to. I tend to hold myself to a higher standard, and like I definitely think that I could always be doing a better job than I am. I think the team is doing a great job, obviously, but no, if I don't hear feedback about something, that's not automatically going to make it a good change. It was more of a joke, really, but
that's fair. See, it's honestly like the one thing that I was thinking about before this stream was I was like, remember, this is like actually something that's semi-official. Just like don't meme it up and say anything dumb.
Oh, we can meme it up. That's fine.
So I'm like, oh no, I twisted Roy's words. They're never going to talk to me again, man. It's over.
No, if anything, I'll get in trouble. Not you.
Oh, perfect. Well, in that case.
Yeah.
Cecil, did you have anything you wanted to add about like stuff you've done that people liked?
Honestly, I think the things I've done that people like are mostly my communication things. I think people enjoyed my retro blog, and specifically my my stealing of the gliding bug.
Yeah, the fall damage stats.
Yeah, I love fun data, and when I would get the opportunity to share some of that stuff in our communications, it's like a great time for me personally, and everybody I talk to seemed to really enjoy those. I would also say, just kind of reiterating, I think, even our most positive changes will have detractors, right? This is even detractors that aren't in the World v World community. I think that's important to remember. I'll give you a negative side of the stat selectable exotic vendor. It definitely hurt the minstrel market on the trading post, right? So those players are going to have opinions about that. And I think it's good that they do, right? I think it's good for our team to remember that changes we make in our game mode don't just impact our game mode. They impact the entire game, and
PvE also exists.
For us,
SPVP also exists.
Exactly, and like as the competitive producer, I have to think about both both SPVP and World v World, but I try to also consider PvE and just make sure we're not negatively impacting those players. I try to take a do no harm approach to most of our stuff. As I think about the game. that I want to improve things for players while having the least negative impact. But it's development. There's always going to be trade-offs in things that you have to do. But yeah, my universally liked thing is people really appreciate communication, and I've been championing that a lot on our team.
Yeah, I think that's a great kind of lesson and message to take away from it, because I think it has been really appreciated, even if people don't necessarily agree with what the changes are. They like hearing like what the change is and maybe some of the rationale with it as well.
Yeah, and another thing that I know Chef is familiar that I do this, but like I try to play with lots of different World v World groups. If you run at a regular time and have that posted somewhere publicly, I do try to jump in and join those players, because it lets me experience the different, you talked about the many different player types. There are way more than you even named, right?
Yeah.
And it is incredibly challenging to always put my brain in those spaces without just going and experiencing it. And so that's been a really fun thing I've been doing for the last pretty much year and a half, 2 years, where I'll just a couple of nights a week I will jump in and play with people. And as I said, I frequently play in OCX times and have a lot of experience in that time zone, just because I have a really weird sleep schedule. But
yeah, he's doing footage reviews at 3 a.m. There's no group he won't play with.
That's true. And if you have a draft tournament that you would like me to participate in, message me. I'll try it. I will probably cause a team to lose, though. That's I'm not good at the game. I just love it a lot.
So I structured the first part of this conversation as, restructuring specifically, and then the back half is more general game stuff. And I was anticipating it to go a little over an hour, but it is currently 48, and we haven't made it to the back half yet. But I do kind of want to hit on some of the bigger points that I had laid out. And the first one is that we've seen a lot of changes to the world versus world environment over like the last 2 years or so. Quality of life changes, structural changes, scoring changes, restructuring coming out, obviously. What are some of the biggest structural challenges to the game mode that still exist? Some like the biggest imbalances that you're looking at fixing, some of the biggest issues that you want to work on improving.
So, I think there's kind of two things. One, we've been able to do, I'd say, a decent amount of the things that we kind of set out to, or at least I set out to when I first joined the World vs. World team, which was a little over a year ago. And obviously, World Restructuring was, of course, a big one. But, just releasing World Restructuring isn't enough. Like we've been saying, there's changes we want to make, there's iterations we want to make. And, I think I don't know that that's necessarily going to change. Because, again, would it be great if one day we were like, oh, World Restructuring is perfect. Oh, we've cracked the code, and every single player agreed with us? That would be amazing. But is that realistic? Maybe not. So I think we're definitely going with the idea of we have the system in place. We're gonna continue to try to make it better and make tweaks to it. And it's the same thing with other changes that we've made, like content focused changes. The scoring changes that partially went out this week and that will be finished going out on Friday are kind of the same thing, where these are the first real scoring changes we've had to the game mode in, I want to say, maybe ever. I can't really think off the top of my head of other real significant scoring changes that have happened outside of when skirmishes first got introduced.
It's either since the addition of PPK or the transition to 1-up 1-down when Glicko got removed. I think it's probably either of those.
Yeah, that's. I guess that's kind of. Yeah, you should definitely call that scoring. I guess I was thinking more along the lines of like matchup structure.
Yeah. So last change would have been like shifting off Glicko in 2017. That was.
Yeah. And so so we're trying these changes out, and obviously we've seen a lot of feedback, both positive and negative, around it. It's the first time we're trying these, and I said this on the stream that we did a couple weeks ago. A lot of these numbers are not numbers that we're like sold on 100% at the gate. There's a good chance that we're not gonna just hit the right numbers immediately, and we're gonna need to iterate on them. Whether that's just changing numbers, whether that's changing the amount of buckets we're using, whether that's changing the amount of or the way that we're changing numbers and distributing numbers, whatever that might be. Maybe we need to pull back on changing the war score for objectives. Maybe we need to pull back on the PPK change. Maybe we need to pull back on the VP change. Whatever that might be, that'll continue to be iterated on. And so I think the overall goal, and I again said this a couple weeks ago on that stream, we definitely want to focus on incentivizing winning, making winning matter, giving players a reason to care about winning, care about matchups, care about fighting for their battle guild now, or their team.
They are officially called battle guilds now. That's correct.
Yes. And I think we're in a much better place to do that. I personally didn't really think that we should try to start moving in that direction, until we had scoring addressed. Just because I think, one of the reasons that seasons got pulled away from, you mentioned this earlier on in the stream, the development team at the time was worried about player burnout, players overextending themselves. We saw unhealthy behaviors, earlier on, or rather I should say the previous developers saw unhealthy behaviors, and as a player I saw unhealthy behaviors, and I even did some of those unhealthy behaviors as a player to try to win. And so we want to set World versus World up to be a place that you're not going to just play 24/7 for a week and then not play for weeks or for months on end,
or possibly ever again, as was the case with a lot of people post seasons, where they're like, I did 24-hour raids. I can't play this game anymore. I'm just leaving. And
so we want to get into a place where it feels like you can play and you have a goal. We want the goal to be to win. We want the goal to be for players to work together and work as servers, but again in a healthy way. And so I think there were a lot of quality of life changes that we made to make playing the game mode feel better and feel healthier. Scoring is a big part of that in sort of a larger way as well. And again, all those things need to be iterated on, whether that's changing the supply cost of an error cart, whether that's changing the point value of a skirmish, whatever it might be. Those are things that need to continue to be iterated on. But ultimately, we want to work towards incentivizing winning, making winning matter, and we're definitely setting ourselves up to be in a better place to start doing that. And so that's going to be the sort of, again, what we're looking at moving forward with, again, in mind, keeping an eye on the changes we've put out and how we can continue to iterate on those and make those better.
Yeah, I would say a lot of the stuff we're doing right now is systemically in support of that idea of, making winning matter in a competitive game mode. And one thing I'll add to that is something that we talk about a fair amount is the idea of shared player goals in Winning Matters. One thing we hope Winning Matters will have an effect on the community is that all of those different scales and types of players will be more aligned in the things that they want to do, or more accurately, that the things they want to do contribute to the same mindset. Where you see this problem occur, specifically a communication or social problem occur when, for example, a team wants to drop down a tier to get better fights versus always trying to win. You get that inconsistency of competitive play. And so that's just an important thing to us, is we want people to, sort of want the same things, and we want to incentivizing those things, getting people to understand their common goals a little better as part of Winning Matters.
Yeah, I love that. I think there's at times a lot of animosity between things like, scouts, roamers, PPT guilds, and PPK guilds, because they all kind of, what's fun in World versus World for them is kind of different for each of those four communities. They're all kind of looking for slightly different things, and there's no kind of unifying goal that pulls everyone together to work for a shared objective, because winning kind of isn't really incentivized that heavily. And I totally agree with the way that you guys are talking about it, in that if you had some kind of carrot on a stick for doing well in a matchup, that you would incentivize some of those different groups of players to want to work together, play together, and contribute to some shared goals, because you'd all kind of get something out of it that you all want.
Yeah, you said a really important thing there that I want to distinguish, right? It's not always about incentivizing you to do a thing by putting a carrot on a stick. A lot of times it is about aligning what you get out of the thing, what you get out of your fun is aligned with the things other people want, right? So I personally believe that like the recent adjustment that Roy made to PPK, right, moving points per kill from 2 to 3, is better aligning fight guild success with the goal of getting war score in a matchup, right? And there's more we need to do there, but that is the kind of thing where it's like we want your fun to be recognized by the system. You know?
Gotcha. Sorry, I'm fighting for my life. I'm good.
Stay alive,
Okay.
Chef.
Yeah,
You
no,
die on the
that's a
stream,
good
just scream
good distinction to make. Because I think that a lot of those communities kind of feel slighted sometimes by the fact that the majority of the player base tends to take kind of the Zerg-oriented approach. And what they enjoy doesn't always feel prioritized because everybody around them, like not talking about what ArenaNet does necessarily, just talking about the mentality of the player base. Like the majority of players are in groups and they're fighting to either win a matchup or defeat another Zerg. So, giving these different communities kind of different avenues to contribute and have their own fun, I think is a positive development.
Yep.
There have also been a bunch of questions about rewards, and I don't necessarily... In fact, I'm almost positive that you guys aren't going to be able to talk about what kind of ideas you have in the pipeline for making rewards matter, but are there other kind of reward structures that exist in World vs. World? Things like the legendary armor, or the mist trinkets, or things like that might be due for a bit of a rebalance, the same way that we got Dugan added as a currency sink, and the way that we got an exotic armor vendor, and the way that we got a new, just in this last patch, recipe for unlocking some new ascended weapons. Are there different kind of corners of World versus World that maybe haven't been touched in a while and are looking a bit outdated that you guys have flagged as something to get iterated on in the future?
I don't think we have anything in that area necessarily to talk about, other than like, rewards and acquisition is always something we're just thinking about with any new update. Is like, are there adjustments that we should make here? Roy, do you have anything on your list for that?
I mean, you're right that we probably can't talk about specifics.
Yeah.
I'll say... This is what I'll say. So, you mentioned Dugan. We talked about Dugan a couple times. That was in response to a problem that has existed for a while, right? Which is that World versus World players have a lot of different World versus World currencies. They don't really have a lot of things to spend those currencies on, especially once they've gotten, well geared up. So, maybe for like a player who's kind of newer to the game, who's getting into World versus World for the first time, they don't have a lot of those currencies. They've got more things to spend their tickets on and whatnot. And that's great. If for someone who's been playing the game mode for a while, maybe they have 80,000 tickets built up. And they don't have anything to spend them on, and that's obviously a lot. So that's a problem that is very clear. It's a problem that has existed. We've done other things besides just Dugan, but yeah, Dugan's a good example. Adding that vendor is a good example of us trying to solve that problem. And I'll just say, there are other problems that exist, and that problem still exists in some sense, right? Like that merchant alone wasn't enough to completely fix. It wasn't enough of a currency sink to completely remove all the currencies. Not that should be the goal either, but we can always improve on that. And I think just like that, if there are other issues that exist, if there are other problems related to rewards that exist, then those are things that we are going to eventually want to try and solve if we think that those are problems, if we think those are issues. And that's obviously not maybe not a helpful answer. Again, not very specific, but yeah, I'm not going to say like, no, we're never going to do anything more with rewards. No, we're never going to look at, legendary acquisition structure with World versus World.
Avenues to unlock trinkets, things like that, since that's the big missing one right now.
Yeah, if there's a problem that exists in the game mode, at some point or another, if we think it is a problem, we're probably going to try and address it in some way. And just like with Dugan, if it worked, that's awesome. If we feel like maybe there's more that we could do, then we will continue to do that, as with everything else.
Yeah, I think one thing I think a lot about, just in our game mode in general, is like guiding people through our game mode, like wanting to attach, increase simplicity, make things more obvious about the things that you want to purchase. Like, I think legendaries become a really common sticking point because it is an obvious quality of life improvement. Once you have legendaries, it's a great chase goal. It's very obvious for players to want those things. There are lots of really necessary things to play in our game mode that like the average player won't be aware of, and just surfacing those things, making them more obvious for players, and then sinking some currency around out, especially out of veteran players with them is very important to us. So we always I love getting that feedback. Anywhere you can reach me, especially the forums. I read the forums all the time. If you have ideas for things you would like to see, added to World v World as more, more currency sinks for us, it's always really useful feedback. Even if we don't do the exact thing, it gives us the idea of the thing you're looking at in those systems.
Yeah, I can't overstate, just go piggybacking off what Cecil was saying, please definitely make sure, I mean, we say this on every balance stream, make sure you're giving us your feedback. I do read the forums, I read Reddit, I read a lot of Discords that I'm in pretty much every single day. So definitely make sure you're giving your feedback, saying what you would like, saying what you like about a change, saying what you dislike about a change, in those places, because there's a pretty good chance that I'll see it. And obviously, that doesn't mean that it's going to happen immediately. That doesn't mean that it's going to happen. But, until, we get that feedback, or when we get that feedback, it's a lot easier for us to work with feedback than none. But, sorry, go ahead, Chef.
God, what was I going to say? Oh yeah, I was going to say there's a bunch of people who've asked like very specific questions about World versus World rewards, and if I ran through all of them, it'd be 30 minutes. Like legendary rune sigils, legendary trinkets. Can I get X? Can I get Y? Yeah, we're not going to be able to get to every single one of them, but the forums are a great place to put that. Of like, hey, it would be nice if there's an avenue to get X out of World versus World.
Yeah, always appreciate that feedback. We're not going to be able to discuss the specifics of any of those plans on this stream, so like that's. Yeah. This is a little bit more of a pass-looking stream, I would say, like talking about existing development.
Increase cooldown.
But obviously we have some vague planned sentences for the future that we can share, such as wanting to make money matters and such.
Yeah, also a lot of people talking about balance. Just to reiterate, this is something that I said to the stream before I had you guys hop on. This is explicitly not a profession balance stream. We're kind of talking about World versus World generally.
Just, I'll say it.
Roy is not on the balance team.
Yeah, neither Cecil or I balance the game at all, which I know is definitely a bit of a misconception because I have previously been running the balance streams. So, of course, it would stand to reason that players would think that I'm on the balance team. That makes sense. But I am, in fact, not on the balance team. Not only am I not on the balance team, I was even farther away from balance when I first started running those streams because I was on the rewards team. I wasn't even on the competitive team working on World vs. World at the time. Just a good bit of lore there.
Yeah,
go ahead.
To reiterate that a little bit, like, we are always happy to get balance feedback, but you just need to have the understanding that we are not the decision makers in balance. Happy to pass along feedback. Okay. I do this for players all the time. I play a lot of structured PvP as well. Players will hit me with bug information or their opinions on current meta and stuff. And I'm always happy to share that with the Skills and Balance team. But it's just not an area where we have any authority or decision-making power.
So what I was going to say is Mika actually asked a really good question in chat about no downstake wheat and Golem Rush. Do you have any information that you can share about whether we'll ever see a return to events in World versus World, and whether they might be put on some kind of like rotating calendar to maybe coincide with holidays or festivals or things like that? So it would be nice to see more of those event returns every once in a while.
Yeah, I mean, again, not going to commit to anything here, obviously. I would certainly say it's not out of the question to think that we'll ever see those events again. I think, without getting into too much, there's not necessarily, like, it's not as though we have decided that those were bad or something. That's not necessarily why we haven't been doing them. There's no reason to think that we couldn't do them again in the future. But we're not going to commit to any of that sort of stuff right now, I don't think.
Yeah, I would say Roy and I are both big fans of events like that in general. As just exciting Roy may not be a fan of the specific ones you mentioned, but the idea of events of that type are definitely something we're interested in. It's just not always a development priority.
The times that you've stopped by my streams, I've given you no shortage of ideas for, like, you know,
Yes.
killer week event ideas. So you've got a huge backlog just from those.
Yeah, everybody
All of them have
send
been
me
good.
your bad event ideas. I love hearing them. They're actually some of my favorite things.
I consider myself in many ways to be an ideas man, in that I don't really have like any other marketable skills or talents. I'm just good at coming up with ideas. And then we are like 10 minutes over, but I wanna poke at one or two more quick questions, and then we'll probably wrap up. I know that there's been a lot of like conversation, discussion about the way that defense events are changing and the way that Siege is changing in particular. That element of the game is kind of in flux, and the existence of Siege in the first place is, you know, one of the things that kind of defines world versus world and makes it this unique game mode is that you have these things that you can build, you have destructible walls, you have destructible gates. To the extent that you can, what is kind of your design philosophy around what Siege should do for the game mode and how it should be used that's driving a lot of those changes and modifications?
So I think that
Do you want me to try and kick you off? Because I've read into it a bit, and I think what it seems like to me is that it's a prioritization of defense being an active event that takes place between players, rather than being a passive event that takes place between a player and a static game-defined objective, like a wall or an NPC, etc. That's at least how it reads to me, with like the structural invulnerability changing being a dampening effect rather than an immune, with the disabler change being a reduction in effectiveness and making Siege easier to kill. It seems like one of those things that's like, it incentivizes players responding to an objective that's being attacked, but if it's an attacking group trying to break into an empty objective that has no active player defenders, it's really like not a change at all. It doesn't make any difference for them.
So, yeah, so what I'm mostly just trying to find the right words to say what I want to say more than not necessarily knowing what I want to say, which is, I think, kind of what you were touching upon. Yeah, we want the engagements, across the game mode to be active ones. I think, in general, it is meant to be a player versus player game mode at its root. And so obviously, we want to encourage player versus player interactions. That's not to say that, I think if you can successfully outmaneuver players and, avoid fighting them and take their objectives without them knowing, then that's just credit to you. If for whatever reason, if they're not scouting properly or you're just doing a good enough job to outmaneuver them, then I think that's credit to you and you should be rewarded for that. But yeah, I think primarily when we're talking about what I'll say, like an actively defended structure versus an actively attacking group. So when there's a group of players trying to get into a structure, trying to flip that structure, versus a group of players actively trying to stop them, we want both sides to feel like they have tools to use. We want both sides to feel like what they're doing is engaging and fun, and not to feel like they are basically being denied a chance to do what they're trying to do, and also enjoy what they're doing. And so yeah, the change with structural integrity, where before it completely denied any damage, well, that really shut down a siege for a specific amount of time. And so we looked at that and we felt kind of like that wasn't really the behavior we wanted to see. We want players to not feel like they're going to have to stand around for a minute doing nothing.
Especially if there's nothing in that objective that's actually threatening you. And it's just, sitting on your hands for like a minute because your siege doesn't work.
Absolutely. And same thing with Siege, both offensive Siege and defensive Siege, and talked about this a little bit on either the stream that we did a couple weeks ago. We primarily were looking at what we considered more defensive Siege, which is air carts and trebuchets. And obviously trebuchets can be used pretty offensively as well, and I think with the reduction in supply costs, we're probably seeing that a little bit more often now. But we want Siege both offensively and defensively to feel as though it has a use and has a purpose. And there's certainly more work to be done on that. I'm not going to claim that a cost reduction in Eric Hearts and Trebuchets has made all Siege perfect now. Yeah, it's going along the same route where we want players on both sides of the equation to have tools, to use. We want players on both sides of the equation to feel as though they're empowered to play the game, play that defense or offense. We don't want one side to be just like washing out the other all the time. And so that's what a lot of the changes, both back and forth, have been kind of aimed at.
Cool.
Yeah, I would say one thing I think about in this specific case is also just like, we want you to use your buttons, right? We want you to not have as much time of your game, just be standing around waiting on a given thing to happen. And that's a thing we think about a lot. It's not the easiest fix to make by any means, but good to encourage players to press buttons.
Yeah, for sure. So I've noticed that this squad is currently led by a player named Senap. So Cecil, I think you in particular have a commitment that you now need to get to, and I've used up all your time available. And also we're 12 minutes over when I wanted to have it run anyway. But yeah, I appreciate you guys, agreeing to this and coming to chat a bit about, where you see the development of the game mode going and some of the history of it, some of the issues that you've identified, stuff like that. I will say, for people in chat who asked a question that I didn't ask Roy or Cecil, it's probably because it was a little too specific, or it was about future plans for the game. And I know from previous experience that those are questions that are unlikely to get a straight answer because, nobody wants to give away the stuff that they're working on. But the forums are a great venue for initiating those kind of conversations if it's something that you really want to know.
I will also say, fortunately for you, Awesomeness can ask me at any point his questions, since they're our coworker. And also, it's Captain John actually DM'd me on Discord an hour ago the same question he asked you in chat. So, it's those questions are being seen. Don't worry. I think
so. There's other venues available.
Yes.
I do want to answer one question I saw come up a couple of times, which is about the Q-Bug. Q-Bug, if you did not read my blog from quite a while ago at this point, from our previous World Restructuring beta, the Q-Bug was something that was increased and is currently increased by the action, the fact that World Restructuring is on. That's actively being worked on. So the Q-Bug is under investigation. There's engineering resources dedicated to solving that issue. It's just slow. We have a very complex game, and some the things like that have been proven really difficult to fix. So yes, it is actively ongoing. I would say, just to reiterate a point from that blog, that is one of the reasons we increased the tiers in each region, was to address, lower the impact of that queue bug, make less queues overall.
I know there was a period as well where you're like, we want to fix this before we release the restructuring system, and I'm, not to be negative about it, but I'm glad that you decided not to do that, because the queue bug has existed forever.
Yes,
it seemed like it was going to be really hard to narrow down.
We're trying to solve two things, right? There is the specific aspect of the queue bug that is made worse by World Restructuring. That's the thing we were trying to solve before launching World Restructuring, and we elected that it was going to take more time than we were willing to hold the launch, because, as I said earlier, launching the system gives us a lot of important live data to iterate further on the system. So that was an important factor in us making that decision. But yeah, we're not done with it. It's an active investigation. We're continuing to work on it. And I would say on the specific tiers aspect, that is just another aspect of the system that we're always observing. We are looking at the population across the time zones. We are discussing, do we need to have these tiers? These are always things that are on the table to change at any given team creation. And what we've done that I'm very happy with is we've given ourselves a very, I wouldn't say simple, but a very identifiable point to make those kind of structural changes to the game mode. We can do it basically on each team creation. We can make that call.
And that's a human-initiated process as well, right? That's not like an algorithm deciding how many tiers there's going to be.
Correct.
Correct.
Yeah.
That's
we
a great
choose
idea.
how many tiers there are based on quite a lot of data that we've pulled together around world restructuring. I am super not looking at my supply.
No, it's okay. I'm taking care of you. Don't worry. I got you. I'm giving you barrier like when it's available, which is not that often, but I'm helping. Any other questions that you guys noticed in chat that I happen to miss? Because I think we've all kind of been looking at a lot of different things going on at the same time.
I wasn't watching chat a ton during this, to be honest. So I don't really know. There weren't specific questions that I would look to. All I'll say is I welcome opportunities like this to come and chat with people. And I mean I'm always happy to talk to people wherever they may be able to find a way to talk to me. And like I said, I really do, promise that I'm keeping an eye on Reddit and the forums. Like anytime I see some sort of World versus World post on Reddit, I open it up and I read through the comments. I try and keep an eye on like new topics on World versus World, the World versus World section of the forums. It really is important to me to try and get a sense of what the community is feeling. Like Cecil said before, there have been points where I've been trying to play with a lot of different groups in World versus World. I haven't had as much time to play recently, but hopefully I can start that up again. But at the end of the day, the main thing is I just I want to definitely be making good changes for the community and for the game mode as a whole. And so I welcome any and all feedback, any and all discourse from players and from the community. I would like to think I am at the disposal of said community and players, and so please feel free to reach out or post feedback through various forums if you want to. And obviously, Chef, thank you very much for having us on your stream and being a wonderful host. It's been fun to chat.
Man. It's been a good time.
Absolutely.
Thank you, Tag. Everyone say thank you to our Tag. People don't thank public tags often enough. Although I'm realizing I forgot to thank the previous 2 public tags, so I'm kind of the asshole now.
You're perpetuating the problem, yeah.
Yeah, look, nobody's perfect. I'll go back. I'll watch the VOD, figure out who it was, send them a mail, be like, thanks for tagging. It was a good time.
Yeah.
But yeah, thanks for hanging out. I hope you guys have a good rest of your week. I hope you have a good weekend, and we'll see you around on the forums, we'll see you around on balance streams, and we'll see you around on maps every once in a while.
Yeah.
All right.
Awesome. Thanks so much. Have a good one.
Yeah, you guys too.